alien abductions are among the scariest accounts in the paranormal realm. The following terrifying eyewitness account comes from someone who approached the paranormal scholar, wanting to share his experience. At the age of 12, the witness reports experiencing a series of increasingly bizarre phenomena, which culminated in the realization that he and his brother had been repeatedly abducted by aliens.
I swear on the Bible that these events occurred. I was abducted by aliens. For much of my childhood, I lived with my grandparents on their farm in Beeville, South Texas, USA. The year was 1972. I was 12 and my younger brother was 10. My brother and I slept in the middle of the house in twin beds. Our bedroom window faced east, overlooking the 13 acres of fields my grandfather used to farm to feed his animals. It was spring and the fields had just cleared, being plowed, furrowed and sown. On that particular night, my brother and I went to bed around 9 p.m. However, none of us could sleep. Before going to sleep, we had both seen some strange objects flying across the sky. We were in the company of adults at the time, including my uncle, who was a major in the SAC Strategic Air Command. One of the objects looked like a blazing ball of fire. My uncle reported it to the police department, who told him that the weather department stated that it was a meteor burning up as it entered the atmosphere. However, the sphere of fire traveled from east to west, crossing the horizon. At that time, we were also getting a lot of jets from the nearby airfield, flying low over our farm. In hindsight, my time in the military made me realize that jets were flying low to avoid the radar. At the time, my uncle had pointed out a particular aircraft that he didn't recognize. Since he was a high-ranking officer in the USAF, and was familiar with all known types of military aircraft, he was confused. He also phoned about it, not claiming it was an alien craft or anything like that, but claiming it was an aircraft he couldn't identify. The Air Force Base reported that two jets that broke the sound barrier passed our area, but the craft had already disappeared. As bizarre as it was, strange objects in the sky were just the beginning of our encounter. One night, while watching TV with one of my relatives who had seen the fireball, there was a loud bang on the roof. Footsteps coming from the back of the house towards the front porch. Along the main beam of the house, it sounded like a giant. Frightened, my older relative grabbed my grandfather's rifle and told us to stay indoors. He went outside. When he came back, he told us that there was no one there. It was after my uncle returned to his military base that I started having the dreams. I dreamed of doctors in masks doing something to my teeth. I also started having sleepwalking episodes. My grandmother, who rose before dawn, would find me standing in the hallway that connected her room to ours. One day I asked my brother if he had any recurring dreams about doctors. He told me he had, every night. We promised each other that the next time it happened, we'd both try to scream ourselves awake to see if the dreams were real. It was night and my brother and I had just climbed into bed. My grandparents were on the back porch just behind our bedroom, my grandmother in her chair and footstool and my grandfather in his rocking chair. Just before we fell asleep, I noticed that there was a set of car headlights driving down the road at the edge of the field, towards the house where my aunt, uncle and 4 cousins lived. It was very dark, so all we could see were the headlights and what they illuminated. I thought the driver was drunk, as the vehicle's high beams were on. When you live in the countryside, you learn everything about those who live around you. What kind of car do they drive? What time do they leave and return home? Who belongs there and who doesn't? You have to know these things, because there's only one sheriff's department to call, and that's 10 miles away. Strangers mean trouble. They could steal your farm equipment, your animals, yes, those thieves still exist, or break into your home. The rule of the field is to keep an eye out for your neighbor in hopes he'll return the favor. My brother and I watched the headlights go to my uncle's house. Usually her dogs came out barking, but this time they were silent. I figured maybe they were inside the house. As we watched, the headlights stopped. It looked like the vehicle was trying to turn around and go back to the other side of the road. It was then that my heart skipped a bit. I felt someone watching us. As if they knew we were watching them through the window, the lights stopped and turned in our direction. I joked to my brother that it looked like the drunk was going to run into the barbed wire fence and get stuck in the drainage ditch. Regardless, the lights kept coming towards our house. The idiot was now coming across the field. He must be really drunk, I told my brother, and would probably have to pay my grandfather for the fence he had destroyed. The field was plowed, but the headlights stayed level and slowly approached the house directly toward the window where my brother and I were watching. I wondered where our dogs were, who should be barking at this hour. There were 2 more fences between the vehicle and our house. I doubted the driver would go through both. The headlights reached the first fence and stopped. "He's gone," I told my brother. Then, to our horror, the lights began to lift off the ground and over the fence. We saw this very clearly as the lights were now approximately 90 meters away. We shouted at the same time. "Monster!" Terrified, we called our grandparents. By this time, the vehicle was making a screeching noise, like industrial engines running. It was so loud that my brother and I were screaming at the top of our lungs and we could barely hear each other. We run out of the room and hide under the kitchen table. We still didn't hear any response from our grandparents. The door leading from the kitchen to the back porch was open. The effort it took to leave the hiding place, go to the door, close and lock it, with who knows what watching from the other side, was tremendous. We weren't sure. I stopped my brother from yelling by telling him that if we didn't keep quiet, the monsters would surely find us. I prayed to God to send an angel to save us. I closed my eyes, put my fingers in my ears and waited to see if we would be found. My brother looked like he was in shock. Eventually the sound went away, gradually becoming more distant. I wept with gratitude that we had been spared. I heard my grandparents talking on the porch. My grandmother asked my grandfather if he had closed the door. I crawled under the kitchen table and walked out to where they were sitting. Why didn't they come inside the house? Had they not heard my brother and I screaming, calling to them? Didn't they hear the machine? My grandmother seemed to have no clue. Using my full name, she asked me what I was talking about. Changing tactics, I told my grandfather that I had seen someone turn off the road and walk past our fence. He went outside and then came back saying no one was there and the fence was intact. I was shocked, it just couldn't be. I went back to the kitchen to convince my brother to convince our grandparents of what had happened, but he was sleeping under the kitchen table. I helped him back to his bed. Exhausted, I immediately fell asleep. The next day, when I was alone with my brother, I asked him to come with me to tell our grandparents what had happened. My brother acted like he didn't understand. When I related the events to him, he said he didn't remember anything and that I was going crazy. But I'm not crazy, I knew what had happened the night before. Why was I the only one to remember this? A month later, as I walked down the road to visit my cousins, I once again had the feeling that I was being watched. I knew exactly where to look this time to see what was watching me. It was above me to my right. In the movie Starman, the spaceship was a big reflective sphere. That's what I was looking at high above my grandfather's farm. At first I thought it was a planet, because of the reflection of the ground below it reflecting off its mirror surface. Then I understood that it was something that did not belong in this world. It floated silently above the field. I stood in the road, looking at it. Then I got angry. I yelled, "Okay, you got me, what now?" The orb gradually disappeared into a cloud bank and was gone. I didn't mention the second event to anyone, because after my own family's reaction from the beginning, there was no point. No one would believe me. I know how it sounds. I know this is unbelievable, but I swear by the Bible that these events occurred, and that I relate them in complete truth, as far as my memory allows. I was abducted by aliens.